So, as we continue on our discussion, we were in chapter three, and kind of ended last week, this kind of extended discussion of obedience and faith and which comes first, and even a discussion of how Bonhoeffer understands taking very literally and specifically what Jesus says at face value, um, but also that whatever we do or however we act is based on God's initial act. Um, Yes, we can respond. Yes, we have the ability to reject, to go another way, to question, to stall, to do all of these things. But ultimately, God is the one that makes the initial invitation. God is the one that sees fit to invite us to follow. And then God sees is the one that orders how our following looks or what it is that we do. Simply our primary and really only thing is to say yes. And then what follows is based on God's will, what God needs from us as followers of Jesus. And so it is an opportunity to have full freedom, but freedom in a much different sense. It's freedom to trust God and to rely on God for all that we need, um, which is different than freedom to do whatever we want to do or freedom to go our own way. We say yes to Jesus, we're going Jesus' way. We say yes to Jesus. Jesus is the primary object of our adoration, of our focus. Jesus, being with Jesus, is what drives our day-to-day actions. And when we make that choice to follow in that way, then we are saying to ourselves, to God, but also to the community around us that of greatest importance is following Jesus, and we're going to do the best that we can to follow exactly what Jesus says, and go to places and do the things that Jesus asks us to do, or really that we are led to do because we are trying to imitate what Jesus has already done. Um, so with that, I'll pause for a minute. That was kind of a little bit of a wrap up, a synopsis of chapter three, and moving into chapter four with discipleship and the cross. So any comments, questions, concerns? Oh, excuse me. All right. Um,
Father Womack,
yes, ma'am.
I do have maybe a little explanation.
Hmm.
Because what he's saying, in order to be free from for faith, we must be diligently concrete in our obedience.
Hmm. Right, right, right. So, so for Bonhoeffer, he's very literal when it comes to what Jesus says. If Jesus says, you know, uh, you know, give up your possessions and follow me, that's it. But again, Bonhoeffer comes back around toward the end and say, but Jesus has to ask us to do that. We don't just automatically do it because maybe that's not what Jesus needs for us to do. And so there's really this kind of very interesting kind of opening to a very individual understanding of how God has called each of us. Oh, yes. That's great.
Yep, I understood it in my way of thinking that we were pupils
Mm-hmm.
on this journey.
Right. Mm-hmm. We are always learning. Yep.
Always learning. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And as all good students, we pay attention, and the teacher says you should do this, we do it. And of course, in our schooling here, in an earthly way, it's because we want to get a good grade. But to a certain extent, it's even beyond that because a lot of when we've had really good teachers, really inspiring people, we want to do well because we want to honor the fact that they have seen fit to pay attention to us, to teach us, to pour from themselves into us the knowledge that they have amassed. And so our response in Thanksgiving to that is to do the best we can. Our response in Thanksgiving to that is to learn and to then apply that learning. Our response in Thanksgiving to what they have done in their agency and their wisdom and their knowledge is to now take that and then apply it and use it in a way that is good and wholesome and life-giving. And so likewise, the lessons that Jesus teaches us, we apply. We do them in the way that we're instructed, and we are listening to what it is specifically we need to do as students of Christ, as followers, as disciples. Yep, exactly. Thank you both. Um,
So you're saying that it's based on our own and not to God?
Say that last part again.
That what you're saying is based on our own and not to God?
No, no, it's based on God, um, solely. Um, but where our individuality comes
Our
in is
obedience to God is based on that, but our
mm-hmm,
goal is our own. Is it
mm-mm.
that?
No, our goal is to do what Jesus asks us. But it's not going to look the same for everybody because there are particular things that Jesus needs for us to do, God needs for us to do because of what God's will is. Sometimes it makes sense, it fits. It was like, oh, okay, I understand that because I was going that direction already, or this fits for me because it rings true to who I am. And then sometimes it's like, wait a minute, why am I going this way? I'm not supposed to go this way. This is what I was supposed to do. This is what I didn't start out doing. I don't want to go that way, but God has said this is the way I need you to go. And when we've committed, when we have faith, when we're obedient, then we go.
Okay.
And then we kind of figure out or see along the way, oh, that's what this means. Or, oh, I had no idea why this was happening, but now I see it. Sometimes it takes a lifetime to figure it out, but yeah.
So it's our obedience to God,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. All starts with our obedience. Yep.
not on our own.
Mm-hmm. Right. Not on our own. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks for the clarification.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Thank you. Excuse me. Um, so on the moving into chapter 4, on that first page, chapter 4, he's written down Mark 8:31 through 38. So, when Jesus is talking and began to teach them the Son of Man must go through great suffering, and then Peter says, we won't let this happen. Jesus said, get behind me, Satan. Then after he rebukes Peter, then calls the crowd and his disciples and says, if any one of you want to be my followers, let them deny themselves, take up their cross and follow me. And then this paradox of, those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life will, for my sake and for the sake of the gospel, will save it. And then, for what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. So there's this paradox of giving up to gain, um, that we, whereas we're taught and it makes logical sense that, that we try to save our lives, preserve our lives, but Jesus is saying we must give up our lives in order to save them. We must give up our lives in order to find them. We must give up ourselves in order to find our true self. Um, let's give up our freedom in some ways, being obedient to God, in order to be truly free, to be able to trust that God does actually provide everything that we need. Um, and so, the call to discipleship on the top of 50 um, is here connected with the proclamation of Jesus' suffering. Jesus Christ has to suffer and be rejected. God's promise requires this, or so Scripture may be, and so that Scripture may be fulfilled. Um, and so, suffering and being rejected are not the same, he says. Even in his suffering, Jesus could have been the celebrated Christ. Um, but then he goes on to say that Jesus was also rejected. So, connecting with a law that says, the one who is hung on a tree is accursed. Um, Coming along with this understanding that God, according to God's wisdom and plan, even rejected the only begotten, at least in terms of the sacrifice on the cross. Um, Now, obviously, he didn't reject him completely, obviously, but that sense of separation, that sense of the Son of God knowing what the ultimate price is to pay for sin. And then because it is God's will for that to be reversed, for that to be changed in terms of Jesus, so that we know that we won't be rejected. That as long as we are following Christ, uh, will be saved. We'll be a part of God's family, a part of the people of God, and so we don't have to worry about death. We don't have to worry about the ultimate rejection of of this life for oblivion forever. We know that because Jesus has gone the way before us, that we need not fear. That even though we might suffer, we not fear that we would be rejected. Um, and so, this interaction with Peter and this and Jesus calling him Satan, or the Satan, the trickster, the one who is not thinking of what God is thinking, but with thinking of his own pain, even though he's purporting to protect Jesus and not to allow anything bad to happen to him, which, on in normal circumstances would be a noble thing. Um, he is, telling Peter, no, you're missing the point. Um, this is because God's will needs to be done. So don't try to get me off track. Don't miss the point. Get behind me, because if you don't, you'll be standing in the way of what I must do as obedient servant of the Heavenly Father. But we, often take offense to suffering. We don't like to see people suffer. We don't like to see ourselves suffer. And on some level, when suffering occurs, it feels like, or is interpreted as punishment. That that you are suffering because you have fallen short. You're suffering because you don't have God's favor. But what we see here in Jesus is that the suffering, that the rejection is opens up now something that was impossible before. Not only does it cleanse us of sin, but it also frees us to live without fear of death. It conquers death. That one thing that all of us will have to go through, all of us will have to endure, none of us can escape, is not the final act. Is not the end of us as we go into oblivion or into Sheol, into that shadow realm. but is a gateway to what is next, which is new life, holy life, life everlasting. But we have to go through some things, principally go through death in order to get there. Um, you know, uh, um, and so taking up our cross and following, is to participate, is to be alongside Jesus in his suffering and rejection, is to be alongside, to follow Jesus where he is going, so that we ultimately will end up where he is forevermore. And it's hard to fathom, it's hard to place what heaven would be like because we don't know. We have no idea. I mean, we have ideas, people, some people have said they have died and come back. We have the stories of heaven, these ideas of what heaven will look like from descriptions in scripture, from Revelation and the like. So we have these ideas, but we really don't know. And it seems like a gamble sometimes to trust that everything's going to be okay. But when we believe and are obedient, we live in a way that honors the truth that our lives are tied to Christ. And so if we have consented to follow Christ, if we're following where he leads, then as long as we're with Christ, all is well. Come what may, the suffering, the betrayal, the rejection, uh, all of that, we know will ultimately end up for our good. It's not pleasant to go through, and in many ways, you shouldn't have to go through it because of the evil that people do and the like. But it is a rite of passage, as it were, for us to realize the truth of who God is, that God doesn't leave us, doesn't forsake us, and that the pathway to God is following Jesus, even by taking up our cross. Um, on the top of 51, Bonhoeffer goes on to say, no one can be forced and no one could even be expected to follow him. Rather, Jesus says, if any intend to follow him, despite all the other offers that they may get. Once again, everything depends on a decision. So Jesus says, if any would come after me, let them take up their cross and follow me. If any would follow, let them do what I do. And while the disciples are already engaged in discipleship, everything is broken off once again. Everything is left open. Nothing is expected. Nothing is forced. So this is our free will. Oh, yes. Uh-huh. Ms. Burton?
Yeah, I was going to ask a question.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Would you say that suffering is inevitable in life? It may not be forever, but
Mm-hmm.
at some point it is inevitable.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. It's inevitable.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yes, ma'am. It's inevitable, but it's not well, it's not always a sign of punishment or wrongdoing. Yeah, as scriptures say, if suffering is to be God's will, I think is it First Peter? Then we endure it joyfully, um, because it's part of our story. I mean, nobody looks to have to suffer or necessarily puts themselves in harm's way to suffer. Um, but but if we endure suffering uh, because we are following Jesus, then we can trust that as bad as it is, as long as it goes, as seemingly endless as it might be, as excruciating as it is, that it is giving us that it will ultimately give way to joys that are beyond our reckoning, to a peace that does indeed pass all understanding, to a presence that is so overwhelming, because God is that amazing. And sometimes, not all the time, because I think we do have a certain threshold that is hard to overcome. But I think, we can, on some level, if we're able to keep our minds focused on what is to come and the goodness that God has already shown us and then preparing us for as we go forward. I think that there's a way that we can see through the suffering, or that we can endure it, such that we will see relief and ultimately we'll see God's glory.
Well,
Um,
I'm not thinking of it as a punishment,
uh-huh.
but I'm thinking of it as a calling.
Okay.
Stop. In a calling, yeah, a calling that you would stop. It's a way of getting God getting you to stop, think, and then move on.
Okay. All right.
Am I on the right path?
Yeah. I do. I think so. Yes. hmm
Isn't that John Paul's way of life?
hmm hmm Yeah. But say,
Also,
say once more.
John Paul the Pope.
Yes. Uh-huh. hmm
That
Right.
was his way of dealing with his situation.
Yes. hmm
but
Very true.
also, Father, Jesus promised to not avoid us suffering, but he promised to be with us through
Right.
our suffering, our pain.
hmm Right. Right. And I think on some level, sometimes it's easy for us to take that for granted, that Jesus being with us can help us bear up under the strain. I think I told a story once, and I can't remember if it was a sermon here or it was another time, another place. But I can remember as a little boy, whenever I got sick, and this would be, stomach issue where I would, would regurgitate something. That oftentimes, honestly, I don't remember now if it was my mother and my father or both, depending on this, either of them, depending on the situation. They would, I would be at the toilet and they would come and stand behind me and hold my stomach. And it wasn't magical. It wasn't like as soon as I knew they were there and they touched my stomach, I felt better and it stopped. Um, but even in the midst of the sickness, there was a certain place of comfort carved out because I knew I wasn't alone. I knew that they were going to be there with me. And as long as it took, they were going to be there. And that, you know, gave me, a sense of comfort and peace. Now, I was what, 5 to 8, somewhere in that age range, maybe even a little bit younger. But in my mind, as painful and unpleasant as it was, at least I knew I wasn't alone. And they were not just kind of in the room observing, they were physically there, they were physically holding me. And that's always, at least for me, because, it was an experience that I had, kind of how I feel, or what I try to remember when we, as Colin Moore was saying, Jesus says he'd be with us. That it's not just that he's simply kind of, standing by the wayside, kind of looking at us, saying, I'm here, but is actively involved, is right there holding us in the midst of the pain and the suffering. Again, not in some kind of magical way that miraculously, it ends immediately, or all of a sudden we become superheroes and and break out of whatever it is. But it's that, okay, I'm with you, you're going to get through this. It's hard, I understand that. It's excruciating, it feels like it's never going to end, all of the things, but I'm here. And on some level, that is comforting. And when we can trust, and that's what it all comes back to, the obedience conveys and confers this sense of trust in God that we can take God at face value, and that what Jesus says is true, that I'll never leave you nor forsake you. And that becomes very real in those times of suffering and of loss and sickness and all those sorts of things that we endure. Um, um,
It's pretty
You can have
much.
you can
Oh,
suffer without having pain.
hmm
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's not always that pain is there.
Right. True. True. Yep.
mhm.
That's true. hmm True. And uh, someone was that Miss Collymore? Did you start to say
Oh
something?
no, that's okay. As a
Oh.
matter of fact, Miss Murner
Oh. Okay.
responded.
Okay.
It's
Okay. All right.
not
All
only
right.
pain, but it could be anything else.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Right.
Anguish.
Yes. Right.
Yes.
Right.
Anguish.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Right. Very true. Very true. Um, so um so this is interesting, going into that first full paragraph, when Jesus says, if any want to follow me, they must deny themselves. And so just as in denying Christ, Peter said, I do not know the man. Those who follow Christ must say that to themselves, that we don't know ourselves ultimately. Because self-denial can never result in ever so many single acts of self-martyrdom or ascetic exercises. It does not mean suicide, because even suicide could be the expression of the human person's own will. Self-denial means knowing only Christ, no longer knowing oneself. It means no longer seeing oneself, only Him who is going ahead, only those who are going ahead, no longer seeing the way which is too difficult for us. Self denial says only, He is going ahead, hold fast to Him. So again, it's this devotion to Jesus that says, I want to be with him. It's very similar to what Thomas was saying, let us go with him so we can die with him, when Jesus was on his way to Bethany to see about Lazarus. Now maybe Thomas, was being grandiose or misunderstood, or well, obviously he misunderstood in that moment. But it really is that sense that, where he leads me, I will follow. I'm going to go with him, and if he is going to his death, I will as well. And because again, sounding like a broken record, but I really can't say it more or strongly enough. That it all depends on Jesus, and Jesus as the only thing that we see. Jesus is the primary, well, in many ways, only object of our focus and desire. Then the cost of not going, of not following, is greater than the cost of following. The cost of saying, I'm not ready, or I don't want to go, or I'm scared, and watching Jesus walk away, ultimately is greater than the cost even of our own lives. Because again, we have a trust in God, a belief in God, and obedience to God that tells us that as long as we're with Jesus, we're going to be okay. Even if we lose our lives, because as Jesus said, those who would save their life will lose it, but those who lose it for my sake and the sake of the gospel will find it, will save it, will ultimately come into salvation. Um, And so when the focus is on Jesus, as Bonhoeffer says at the bottom of the page, when we know only Him, then we also no longer know the pain of our own cross. So when we, again, this uh, this the strength of our belief and trust in God, um, you know, in that other things, everything fades to the background. It's kind of like, I mean, there's always been anecdotal evidence of this, but now, scientific research is catching up that that meditation is actually you know able to uh, you know, reduce pain and sometimes to eliminate it. Because our focus is now taken away from that, that pain sense that, whether it's an acute sharp pain or a dull throb, how meditation or focusing on something else can not so much cause us to forget, but that really does rewire our perception. And so here's this is a similar understanding that that when we're focused on Jesus, that even the pain of the cross that we're carrying ceases to be, or ceases to be a burden to us, because again our focus is on Jesus. Um, and we know this in part in some situations where we can, where we can get through something that's unpleasant by focusing ahead, by focusing on the goal, by keeping our eyes on the prize, by not allowing ourselves to be distracted, because the goal is that it's just that it is all encompassing. It is that thing which which takes our the entirety of our attention, and when the entirety of our attention is focused on Jesus, then those things that probably normally would have deterred us, that would have been so onerous that we now can think of anything but that. Whether it's a historic injury that has happened way back that the wound still smarts, or whether it's an acute, immediate injury that we've recently sustained. The pain can derail us, and anybody that's dealt with chronic pain knows this. That that the pain can wear you down, can cause you to focus on nothing else but the pain. But when we're focused on Jesus, or in, staying with the pain metaphor, the physical pain metaphor, or even the emotional pain metaphor, when we otherwise focus on Jesus, then that pain ceases to be a hindrance to us. It might still be there, might not go away miraculously, but it ceases to hold us back. It ceases to stop us from following. It ceases to be a barrier or impediment toward moving forward. It's just another thing. The cross isn't raised from our shoulders. It doesn't go away. It's still there. We still have the weight of the cross to carry, but its significance is reduced or diminished or even gone, because we are so intent on following Christ, so intent on experiencing the presence of Jesus. Um, and so
So this self-denial, as he explains it, isn't that tough?
Isn't that who?
Isn't it tough? The
Oh, sure.
self-denial that
Oh,
he is
yes.
speaking here.
Yep. Oh, yes. Very tough. Yeah. Very, very. And it's not.
Knowing only Christ, no longer knowing oneself.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. This is not easy
Is that
stuff.
possible?
I was
I,
thinking
I
the same thing too, thinking
yeah.
around
Is it
and
really
sometimes you
possible?
forget yourself. But I think it's probably accepting what what you're going through,
It's a
and
lot of accepting, though.
and remembering that Christ went through it for us, his suffering for us.
Mhm. Yeah.
It,
I,
it sounds very difficult to
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I think thank you, Ms. Dillon. Ms. Gaskin, I'm not entirely sure it's completely possible. And I know it's not possible of our own volition. Because it's very we're too easily distracted, I think. Even the most focused of us, you hit the right nerve or, or go down raise the right subject, and next thing you know, we're, off in the stratosphere somewhere. Um,
But when he's saying only when we have really forgotten ourselves completely, when we really no longer know ourselves,
mhm,
only then we are ready to take up the cross
mhm, yeah, yeah,
for the cross's sake.
mhm, yeah.
The abreactive state, Father?
Hmm.
That abreactive state?
Mm.
Are
Yeah.
you there but you're no longer there?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is where the rubber meets the
This is
road,
deep.
so to
It's
speak.
deep.
Say it one more time. I'm sorry.
So this is deep, Father, because
Yeah.
unless you're in abreaction,
Yeah.
abreactive state, that you would, you're either here or you're not there, or you're thinking that you're here.
Yeah. I mean, this is, Bonhoeffer's talking about it here. Meister
Yeah.
Eckhart talked about it. All these mystics, always talk about it. This union with Christ where everything else fades away and it's only
Mm.
Jesus. I'm not sure that we are physically able to do that. And we definitely can't do it on our own. Um, I think sometimes, we can get closer. I think some people, and you hear about, meditators, typically Buddhist, but others that seem to achieve some kind of a state of divine connection that is kind of beyond our normal functioning. But I do think that there is a sense of an aspiration here that Bonhoeffer wants to place in front of his audience, as this is the goal. Now, do we obtain the goal? Do any of us? Do a precious few? And then what does that say?
I
Um,
think he is assuming that this is what should happen.
yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, he's definitely saying that this is what should happen,
It
but
should.
but to your point, can it? Is it
Well,
possible?
it's good for the book.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways, at least for Bonhoeffer, maybe some of the other
Yeah,
mystics
for
that talk
all
about
the
this this way,
writers, they put things in the
but
book, but do they
right.
practice it?
Right. But I think in the context of Bonhoeffer, again, in Nazi Germany, and this kind of stark contrast between the capitulation that many in the church and society were engaged in terms of going ahead and kind of selling themselves out to the Nazi regime for whatever reason, for protection, for wealth, for favor, whatever the thing is. And then Bonhoeffer's over here saying, no, we can't do that because that's the way we're selling out, or we see those selling out to the Third Reich. We should be selling out like that for Christ. And so it's really painting this very stark understanding, this very black and white kind of demarcation between uh, cheap grace and costly grace. But I think, and even, and we actually see this in Bonhoeffer's writings, when you read some of his letters from the jail, and some of his later writings, is he wrote this in that time with the fervor of a young man who saw his society being swallowed up by totalitarianism, and said, okay, how can I combat this. This is the way he did it. And then as he lived a little longer, and obviously he made some choices that don't really necessarily seem consonant with what he's saying in this book, to be a part of the resistance, and resistance in a way that, attempted to assassinate Hitler. Um, as he's waiting for execution, as you can imagine, he's thinking through, okay, how was this what I wrote here, was it realistic? Now that I've come to this point where, I've tried to commit murder, assassinate, a world leader, even though he's a despot and an authoritarian, and doing evil and heinous things. And now I'm caught, and now I'm in jail awaiting execution. How does all of that play back into this? And I think for this book being written in the day, in the time it was written by this particular individual, is really trying to get us to see, or get his audience then, and also us, to how important it is to strive for this kind of union with Christ. How important it is for us not to give up, uh, um, on the costly grace and just accept the cheap grace because it's easier, but really to struggle, mightily with this idea of self-denial, struggle mightily with this idea of following Christ and Christ alone, of seeing only Christ, of denying ourselves, taking up our cross and following Him, of what does it mean to really, to follow Jesus. And it's somewhere in the midst of that wrestling and those questions, like the questions we're asking, we're coming to a better place where we're, more able, or more consistent, maybe, in our desire, and our execution of a faithful walk with Christ. Because I think that's, so that we don't go into it like, oh, well, I'm going to try this, but I'm not going to make it. But we go into it with, okay, yes, realistically, I'm probably not going to be able to do it, but because I'm developing this love for Jesus, I'm gonna go as far as I can. I'm going to do the best that I can, in each and every day, to diminish myself, in terms of my own agency, and follow Christ and build a consistent, community of discernment, a consistent connection with God, so that I'm, to the best of my ability, following what God is saying, and following Jesus as closely as I can. All right.
But are we saying that our minds are clearer than Bonhoeffer at the time of his writings or his beliefs?
I don't know. I don't know if it's a question of clearer. Um,
Hmm.
I think it might be a question. We're just in a different context. Um, and even like I said, Bonhoeffer was asking these similar questions, as he was waiting execution. So it's not completely out of the realm of possibility or of understanding for us to be asking these questions. Because I think it's ultimately in the wrestling with these kind of larger than life impossible questions that we figure out a way to come down in a place that is closer to the ideal. Much closer than if we just said, as Bonhoeffer saying from the very beginning, just, saying, well, it's not worth it. We're going to take this cheap grace and let it be. Bonhoeffer says we need to struggle against that. We need to struggle, in a powerful way, in a mighty way, against, the prevailing notions of whatever society we're in, to see if we're following Christ, vis-a-vis whatever the challenges of our day are. And
I don't know if this is related or not. Maybe it's not, but just thinking about it, when you
mm-hmm,
say just forget about self. But
mm-hmm,
most sometimes when you hear people who rescue people in danger, they
mm-hmm,
always say they don't think about themselves at that
mm-hmm,
time.
mm-hmm. Yeah,
You
yeah, mm-hmm, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that does have something to say here. But again, I mean, to your point, thank you for mentioning that. We as human beings can't always live that. I mean, because, I mean, that our brains, like kind of our, our thinking part kind of shuts off in, in dire situations where we have to act. And, and we can't keep that up all the time. Um, and so, how is it that we keep some of that urgency and selflessness on a day-to-day basis? Again, it won't be ratcheted up that high because, because that's, kind of beyond our capacity. But how do we how are we able to keep that kind of sense of, okay, I am here to do for others. I'm here to serve Christ. I'm here to be as connected with Jesus as I can be. And what does that look like in a moment? What does that look like on a day-to-day basis? What does that look like when we're, going to the grocery store or, doing errands or at work or at school? Or at church, or what does that look like on a day-to-day basis? And I think we're asking those questions. We're occupying our mind and our heart with the right questions, and that keeps us focused on Jesus. And on some level, that's what we're asked to do. As disciples, we're asked to focus on Jesus. So the more we're thinking about Jesus, the more we're thinking about, okay, what is it that Jesus wants me to do? How can I stay as close to Jesus as possible? Is ultimately doing what Bonhoeffer is mentioning, and ultimately doing what Jesus is asking us. Stay close to me. Think about me. Let most of your thought throughout a day be focused on me. And then the more we're able to do that, the closer we are to God's side and to being present as a follower and as a disciple of Christ. All right. Oh, it's 2 minutes till 8. So we're gonna have to break here. Um, we'll start at the top of page 52 next week, and we'll work our way through chapter 4, and then get into discipleship in the individual, because this will kind of answer maybe not answer, but we'll deal with a few of the questions that we've been asking here, and some of them we haven't yet been asking, but we've kind of been just below the surface. So thank you again, as always, for your time, your questions, your interaction in this, and we'll look forward to next week, where we'll still be in chapter 4, and we'll start at the top of page 52. All right. Thank you all, and Compline begins now. All right. God bless everyone.